I've told this story only a handful of times, usually late, usually when someone else has already admitted something they're ashamed to still be afraid of. Even then, I always leave pieces out, not because they're unbelievable, but because they sound too neat when spoken aloud, like a campfire story that knows where it's going. This didn't. That's the part that still sticks with me. It happened in late summer, one of those nights when the heat refuses to let go even after dark. The city had that hollow feeling it gets after midnight. Traffic lights cycling for no one, storefronts glowing to empty sidewalks. I'd been riding with a friend after dinner. Nothing dramatic, just aimless pedaling and talking until we were tired enough to head home. We split at a familiar corner, exchanged lazy goodbyes, and I turned toward my place, thinking about a glass of water and sleep. I lived only a few blocks away. That's what made it feel safe. Close enough that I didn't bother putting my guard up the way I usually did when biking alone at night. The streets were quiet, almost eerily so, but that wasn't unusual for that part of town. There had been construction for weeks, temporary fencing, torn up asphalt, cones nudged out of place by bored teenagers. One block before my turn, the road narrowed into a mess of barriers and gravel, forcing me onto the sidewalk. The sidewalk was tight, narrow enough that two people passing would have to turn sideways. I slowed automatically, coasting more than pedaling, my tires whispering against concrete. That's when I saw him. He was walking in the same direction, a few yards ahead of me. Alone. Medium height, broad shoulders, wearing a jacket that didn't quite fit the weather. Nothing about him stood out in the way you notice someone, because they're clearly dangerous or clearly vulnerable. He looked like 100 other men I'd passed in that neighborhood, unkempt but not destitute, tired but not visibly drunk. Normal in the way that doesn't give you a reason to react. I didn't want to startle him. I'd been buzzed by bikes before, and I knew how jarring it could be. Passing silently felt rude and potentially worse, given how little space there was. So when I was a few steps behind him, I spoke up. Just a quick heads up. Casual, meant to sound friendly. The reaction was immediate and wrong. He spun around so fast I instinctively squeezed the brakes. His face twisted. Not surprise, not confusion, but pure hostility, like I'd insulted him instead of warned him. His eyes locked onto mine, hard and focused, and for a split second neither of us moved. The silence stretched just long enough to register that something had gone off the rails. I muttered an apology and rolled past him as quickly as the sidewalk allowed. My heart was already beating faster than it should have been. I told myself it was nothing. People get irritated. People have bad days. But the look he'd given me clung to my back like a weight. I reached the corner of my street and turned left. That's when he started yelling. At first it was just noise behind me, a burst of anger that I hoped would fade as I put distance between us. Then the words cut through, sharp and unmistakable. Slurs. Threats. The kind of language that doesn't belong to an argument so much as a declaration. He was screaming that he was going to hurt me, that he was going to kill me, his voice echoing off the brick buildings and parked cars. I pedaled harder. The street was empty, my tires loud in the stillness. I could hear his footsteps pounding after me, uneven but fast. Panic has a strange way of narrowing your thoughts. All I could focus on was not stopping, not looking back, not letting him see where I lived. My building was halfway down the block. I could see the shape of it in the distance, the familiar outline of the stoop and the dim porch light. Normally that sight would have been a relief. That night it felt like a trap. I made a split-second decision and kept going. At the end of the street I turned right, then right again, forcing myself into a steady pace even though every instinct screamed to sprint. I told myself he'd give up. People like that always do, I reasoned. They shout, they threaten, and then they disappear back into the night. I clung to that idea as I completed the loop, my lungs burning, my hands slick on the handlebars. When I turned back onto my street, I slowed without meaning to. He was standing on my front steps, not pacing, not shouting, just standing there, facing the road. His posture relaxed in a way that felt deliberate. The porch light cast his face in shadow, but I didn't need to see his expression to know he was waiting, watching. The world narrowed to a single horrible question. How? I hadn't stopped. I hadn't even hesitated near my building the first time through. I'd ridden straight past, eyes forward, doing everything I could to look like I didn't belong to any one doorway. And yet there he was, planted exactly where I lived, as if the answer had been obvious to him from the start. As I rode past again, our eyes met. This time, he didn't say a word. No insults, no threats. Just a long, steady look that felt heavier than the shouting had, like he'd already said everything he needed to say. I didn't stop pedaling until I was several blocks away. I went back to my friend's place, hands shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone trying to unlock it. I don't remember what I said when they opened the door, only that I sat on the floor for a long time afterward, replaying the image of him on the stoop over and over. I texted my mother at some point, vague enough that I could pretend it wasn't as bad as it felt. She wanted me to call the police. I didn't. What would I say? That a man yell at me? That he stood on a porch? There was no clean narrative, no clear crime, just a sense of being seen in a way that stripped something away. I stayed away from my place for the rest of the night. The next day, everything looked normal. Too normal. The stoop was empty. The street went back to its usual rhythm. Delivery trucks, dog walkers, the occasional person sleeping off a night they couldn't afford. I told myself I'd exaggerated it in the dark. Fear does that, I reasoned. It fills in blanks with worst-case answers. Still, I locked my bike in the alley instead of bringing it inside like I usually did. I double-checked the chain, tugged on it harder than necessary. I remember thinking how silly I was being, even as I did it. 2 days later, the bike was gone. The chain lay on the ground, cut clean through. No note, no sign of a struggle, just a space where something familiar had been. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at the concrete as if the bike might fade back into view if I waited. I reported the theft then, filled out the forms, answered the questions. The officer was polite, non-committal, already half-focused on the next call. Bikes get stolen all the time, especially in that area. I knew that. Everyone did. What I didn't say, what I still haven't said to anyone official, is why the loss felt so personal. I don't know if it was the same man. I have no proof, no evidence beyond timing and a feeling I can't quantify. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe he never knew where I lived, and my fear stitched separate events into a single story, because that's what fear does best. But sometimes, late at night, I picture him standing on that stoop again, silent and patient. And I think about how easily he found me, or how easily I assumed he did. That uncertainty is the part I carry with me. Not the shouting, not the chase, but the possibility that, for a few minutes on an empty street, I crossed paths with someone who saw more than I realized and decided not to show his hand all at once. I still bike. I still ride at night. But I don't warn people anymore. And I never assume that being close to home means I'm safe. I've gone back and forth for years about whether this memory deserves to be written down. Part of me thinks it only still feels heavy because it happened when I was young, when fear had fewer filters and adults still felt like shields. Another part of me knows that's a lie, I tell myself, so I don't have to sit too long with the parts that never made sense. This is one of those stories that didn't explode into terror right away. It settled in slowly, like damp in the walls, and stayed there. I grew up near a wide stretch of open land on the edge of our estate. People called it the Heath, though it was really a patchwork of scrub grass, footpaths, river bends, and forgotten utility structures left behind when the area was less developed. From our back fence, you could step straight into it if you knew where the gap was. To us kids, it was freedom. To the adults, it was fine as long as you stay together. There was one building everyone knew not to linger near. It sat a little apart from the paths, half hidden by weeds and fencing that no one bothered to repair anymore. It was once part of the estate's water system, an old pump house or control building, though by the time I was a child, it had long since stopped looking official. The brickwork was darkened with age and soot. The roof sagged slightly. The ironwork that once held doors and frames had rusted into useless shapes. Windows were empty, jagged around the edges, the glass long gone. Nothing about it was dramatic. That was the problem. It wasn't sealed or guarded. It wasn't marked as dangerous. It just existed, quietly decaying, as if daring you to decide whether it mattered. My mother grew up near it. So did my aunts and uncles. They all told us the same thing in different words. Don't mess around there. Not because it was haunted, adults rarely said that out loud, but because things happened and people stayed away for a reason. When pressed, they'd shrug it off, change the subject, or laugh it away. That only made it worse. One summer during the school holidays, the older cousins were home all day. Teenagers old enough to be trusted, young enough to still enjoy being the heroes of the younger kids' world. There were 5 of us little ones, loud, restless, and testing everyone's patience. Eventually, the older boys offered a solution. They'd take us blackberry picking down by the river. My mother didn't hesitate. She was grateful. The rules were simple. Stay together, listen to the boys, don't wander off. We all nodded solemnly, clutching plastic buckets and already imagining stained fingers and pie. Getting onto the heath required slipping through a break in the fence behind my grandmother's house. It was a practiced maneuver. One of the boys lifted me, another handled my wheelchair, and the rest of the kids darted through like it was a race. Within minutes, we were walking paths worn smooth by years of shortcuts. The older boys told stories as we went. They always did, half to scare us, half because we begged for it. They were good at it too, never flashy, always delivered like facts. Ghost stories disguised as local history are far more effective than monsters. When the Waterhouse came into view, the talking stopped. That wasn't something anyone announced, it just happened. Laughter faded, footsteps slowed. Even the boys straightened a little, eyes scanning ahead rather than drifting. The building wasn't directly in our path, but close enough that you could feel its presence, like a wrong note in a familiar song. There was another fence near it, and squeezing through required passing close enough to see the dark interior through the broken windows. I remember holding my breath without realizing it. We all knew the story by then. Some version of it had been told so many times, it felt like shared memory rather than rumor. Decades earlier, a violent crime. Men who hurt people for money. A job gone wrong. Someone young and innocent was killed. A retreat into the heath. A hiding place that turned into a grave. Later, strange smells. Sounds people couldn't explain. People who slept rough nearby are dying under unclear circumstances. No one ever claimed to see a ghost. That was important. It was always framed as unease, as coincidence, as funny business. The kind of story that adults tell children when they don't want to admit they're scared too. Once we were through the fence and moving away, some of the tension eased. A few of us glanced back just to prove we could. The boys hurried us along, their voices light again, as if we'd passed some invisible boundary. The rest of the afternoon was ordinary in the best way. Blackberries bursting under our fingers, purple-stained mouths, cold water up to our ankles, other local kids coming and going, the sun drifting lower without anyone paying attention. It was only on the walk back that the mood changed again. Dusk has a way of rewriting places. Paths look narrower. Sounds carry strangely. When we reached the fence near the Waterhouse, the air felt wrong. Thick, heavy, like the moment before rain. No wind, no birds, just stillness. As the boys helped me through again, one of them froze. He didn't shout. He didn't joke. He just said quietly that something had moved near the back of the building. We all went silent. Another boy laughed nervously, accusing him of messing around, but the tone didn't land. The first boy's face was pale, focused. He said he was going to check, like it was a responsibility he couldn't ignore. Before anyone could stop him, he slipped past us. What followed was fast and confusing. A sudden noise. Not quite a scream, not quite a shout. The kind of sound someone makes when they're reacting before words form. The older boys swore at the same time, urgency snapping through their voices. Someone grabbed me. Someone else yelled for everyone to run. I remember movement more than images. Hands on my shoulders. The jolt as I was lifted. Footsteps pounding. The rattle of my folded wheelchair being carried while someone ran. One of the boys kept repeating the same sentence over and over, telling us not to look back. I did anyway. I didn't see anything. No shape, no figure. Just the path stretching behind us, empty and dim. We didn't stop until we reached the fence that led back to the road. Streetlights glowed beyond it. Houses, cars, normal life. Only then did everyone collapse, gasping, shaking. Someone demanded to know what had been seen. The boy who'd gone to look couldn't get the words out at first. When he did, it was broken and vague. Eyes reflecting light, a face too close, hair where it shouldn't have been obvious. He looked embarrassed even as he spoke, like he didn't trust his own memory. The younger kids started crying. The boys pulled themselves together fast after that, slipping back into their protector roles. They said it was probably a man sleeping rough, or someone hiding from us. They said fear plays tricks when it's getting dark. When we got home, the adults noticed our state immediately. Dirty, exhausted, quieter than usual. The explanation given was simple and believable. Something normal, something dull. No mention of eyes, faces, or buildings. The adults accepted it. Life moved on. We never talked about it again. Not properly, not with the adults, not even much with each other. The Waterhouse remained where it was, unchanged, and we avoided it without ever formally agreeing to. I grew up. I left. I learned how unreliable memory can be, how easily fear fills in blanks. I learned how stories grow. And yet, I still don't like places that feel watched without reason. I still pay attention when someone goes quiet instead of being loud. I still believe that sometimes the most unsettling experiences aren't about what you see, but about realizing how little you actually understand about a place you thought you knew. Life lesson. Fear doesn't always come from the unreal. Sometimes it comes from gaps in understanding, from history half remembered, and instincts we learn to ignore. Pay attention to silence, trust caution without letting it rule you, and never assume that familiarity equals safety.